The message landed in Isla Redgrave's inbox at 5:42 a.m., just as the sky outside her Montecito bedroom was beginning to tint the color of wet slate. She didn't check it right away. Instead, she moved through her morning ritual lighting. A single sandalwood candle stretching in the stillness of her room, then sipping warm water with lemon while Oliver, her 5-year-old, slept in the adjoining nursery. But as soon as her phone buzzed for the 5th time in under 2 minutes, she knew something had broken loose. She unlocked the screen and saw the headline first, bold and cruel against a white background. Shocking surrogacy claims? Is Oliver really hers? The source was a tabloid from London, one she had long since stopped acknowledging. But this wasn't just idle gossip. The story was structured like an expose, claiming insider information about medical inconsistencies, whispers about a sealed hospital record, and suspicious gaps in Isla's public timeline during her first pregnancy. Her hands remained still as she read. She reached for her robe, pulled it tight around her shoulders, and moved silently to the other room. Oliver lay sideways in bed, one arm draped over a plush fox, his cheeks flushed with sleep. She sat on the edge of his mattress and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Her breath caught for a second, though she wouldn't have been able to say why. He looked just like Thomas. The same brow line, the same shape of chin. She returned to the kitchen where Jules, her assistant, had just arrived. He was already reading from his tablet, his expression pale, lips tight. Isla didn't ask. She just nodded once and instructed him to prepare a statement, one that reaffirmed Oliver's birth without giving the accusations any oxygen. No emotional language, no defensiveness, just clarity. But even as she dictated the words, she felt something beneath her ribs start to crack, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief that it had come to this. Across the country, Thomas Alden was landing in Brussels when his own phone lit up. He glanced at the screen, frowned, then scrolled down the full article during the drive to the military summit. He said nothing. He didn't forward it to Isla. He didn't text her to check in. Instead, he handed the phone to his advisor, Benedict Rain, and asked if the palace would make a move. Benedict shook his head. The silence, once again, was left to speak louder than truth. Thomas Alden stared out at the rain-blurred windows of the Brussels Conference Center, the voices inside the summit room rising and falling in waves around him. He sat straight in his chair, nodding occasionally at military policy updates and veteran health strategies, but his focus had fractured. Hours ago, ever since that headline had arrived like a match to dry grass, something inside him had refused to settle. And yet, he hadn't called Isla, not even a message. He told himself it was because she needed space. But the truth was more complicated. That evening, after the summit concluded, Thomas returned to his hotel suite with Benedict Rain trailing behind. Benedict placed a manila folder on the desk, printouts of trending hashtags, media traction data, and early responses to Isla's formal denial. She had chosen her words carefully. Oliver was born to us, loved by us, raised by us, and that's the only truth that matters. It was elegant, understated, but the storm hadn't softened. If anything, it had grown more vicious. Thomas loosened his tie and walked slowly across the room, pouring himself a glass of still water. He glanced at the documents but didn't pick them up. Benedict waited, arms crossed. After a long pause, Thomas asked if Isla had called. Benedict replied that she hadn't. Then he added that the press was now prying into the hospital in Santa Barbara where Oliver had been born. Old nurses, medical staff, even third-party drivers. There was talk of someone selling a confirmation story. It was all circumstantial. But it was catching fire. Thomas didn't flinch. He just sat down, one hand resting on his knee, the other rubbing the corner of his jaw in quiet rhythm. He had been through media chaos before, growing up under it, being chased through it, nearly losing himself in it. But this was different. This wasn't about him. It was about Oliver. About a child who had never asked for any of this now, being dragged into it by adults who fed off suspicion like currency. He asked if the palace had responded. Benedict said nothing had come from them. Not even a private inquiry. Not even a gesture. That silence wrapped itself around Thomas like a familiar, unwelcome coat. He didn't need a statement of support, but some part of him had hoped for one. Anyway, a subtle nod from the institution he once called home, a signal that they would not let this lie grow unchecked. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark sky. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He typed Isla's name into the messages. He stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, and then he closed it. No words. Not yet. He left the phone on the table, unopened, unanswered. While outside the rain kept falling, as relentless as the questions still to come. In Montecito, the wind had picked up by late afternoon, curling dry leaves along the gravel paths that lined the Redgrave estate. Isla stood in the middle of her study, holding her phone in one hand and a legal document in the other, her jaw tight with restrained fury. The press had crossed another line. That morning, a British tabloid had published a photo collage Isla leaving a clinic, Oliver as an infant bundled in Thomas's arms, and a third image no one had seen before. Old staffer who once worked for a birthing center in Santa Barbara now quoted anonymously, suggesting that private arrangements had been made regarding the baby's birth. Jules had come in early, visibly shaken. He had printed every article, highlighted every sentence with traction. Isla hadn't said much. She had simply told him to cancel all external interviews, including a scheduled podcast appearance where she was meant to speak on motherhood and identity. She said it with no emotion, no explanation. Then she turned back to the window, watching Oliver through the glass as he played in the garden with his tutor, completely untouched by the firestorm consuming the adults in his world. Later that evening, her attorney joined her on the veranda. Isla listened silently as he outlined the risk. If they sued, the burden of proof would fall on them. The tabloids would double down. Old staff would be subpoenaed. Courtrooms would fill with press. Every inch of her privacy would be pulled apart, magnified, twisted. But if she didn't act, the lie would calcify. She walked to the corner of the veranda and leaned on the railing. Her eyes were locked on the orange horizon, the sea just a sliver beyond the hills. She asked if it was possible to file a suit abroad discreetly, but firmly. The attorney said it was possible, but it wouldn't be quiet for long. Meanwhile, in London, 2 palace aides held a late-night conference call with Benedict Raine. They didn't mention Isla by name. Instead, they asked vague questions about media instability and whether Thomas had considered releasing a personal video to reaffirm family unity. Benedict said he would pass on the message. After the call ended, he closed his laptop and sat in the silence of the dark hotel room. He didn't call Thomas right away. Thomas was already awake, pacing his hallway. He had read the new article twice. He had seen the photo. He knew that image, the timing, the angle wasn't coincidence. Someone had held it back, waiting for the right scandal to surface before offering it for sale. He called Isla this time. She didn't answer. He stood by the window, phone still in his hand, staring into the midnight silence with something sharp lodged behind his ribs. Regret or shame. Or maybe the weight of having said nothing for too long. The morning was unseasonably cold in Montecito when Isla Redgrave stepped into the sunlit kitchen, her robe trailing behind her like a shadow she hadn't managed to shake. The silence was broken only by the clinking of a spoon against a ceramic bowl. Oliver, seated at the counter, slowly stirring his cereal. Half asleep and blissfully unaware of the headlines that had turned his name into a public battlefield. Isla moved around him like gravity, brushing a kiss against his temple, adjusting the collar of his sweater, her movements soft but distant. She had not spoken to Thomas in 5 days. His call had come late. She'd seen his name on the screen, her thumb hovering over the green icon, and then she had let it fade to missed call. There were things she couldn't say yet, not because she didn't feel them, but because she didn't know where to start. Silence, once a tool of control, had now become a quiet wound neither of them seemed able to close. Later that day, Isla met with the legal team again. The lawsuit was ready, carefully constructed, targeting one publication, one editor, one accusation. She listened to every word, nodding occasionally. But when they asked if she wanted to include Oliver's name in the claim, she paused. Her hand moved to the charm bracelet she wore, fingers tightening around the little silver O that hung near the clasp. Then she instructed them to leave him out. Let the truth defend itself. Let the court decide what the world refused to see. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the eucalyptus trees, a black SUV rolled up the curved driveway. Thomas stepped out alone, his coat slung over one arm, his face leaner than Isla remembered. He didn't bring bags. He didn't bring staff. Just himself. She met him at the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, not in defiance, but in armor. He didn't ask if she was angry. He already knew. She led him to the sitting room. Neither of them sat right away. Then he told her he had called the Palace's private secretary and made it clear that no statement would be needed because he would speak. His own words, his own voice. Isla studied him carefully, waiting for the cracks. But he looked steady for once, and tired. He asked if she still wanted to go through with the suit. She said yes. Then she asked if he would stand beside her when she did. He answered her, not with a promise, not with a grand gesture, but by stepping closer, resting his hand briefly on hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Outside, the lights of the estate flickered on, one by one, as if the house itself was exhaling after a long, breathless wait. And inside, the space between them so long filled with silence, hesitation and doubt began to shift, not toward resolution, but toward something they hadn't had in months, movement.